If you have a Bible and you like to read along with the text, please turn in it to Judges chapter 11. And if anybody feels weak, just go back and get a piece of fish and a brownie and you'll be all right. There's plenty of it back there. So I want us to consider some things this morning. I think they're very pertinent things, and they fit really well with the Sunday school. I didn't plan that, but that's how it worked out. I've prepared all the C.S. Lewis stuff months, actually more than a year ago, to be honest, and so I had no connection whatsoever with today's sermon. However, the Sunday school plays into that very heavily. Think about this statement. This comes from the mystic Oswald Chambers, a mystic from the 19th century. He says this: belief in Jesus for salvation is the abandonment of any claim to merit. Now, that's a very true statement. And then he adds this, I'm sorry?
Say it again.
Okay. Belief in Jesus for salvation is the abandonment of all claim to merit. And then he adds this tag, that is why it is so difficult to believe. I think that's exactly right. Solomon, on the other hand, says the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. Very different perspective about really the same thing. So what are the ways in which we look at these kinds of things? What measurement standards do we bring to ourselves, to others, as to how we will live, and how do we apply those standards? Do we apply them consistently in all cases or inconsistently in most cases, or do we just take pragmatics, that is, what works, to help us make decisions as to how we will apply the things that God tells us are right and are wrong? What we believe and why we believe it will orchestrate most of those decisions. Let's think about that as we look at this text. Judges chapter 11. Did I already say Judges chapter 11, or did I leave that out? Judges chapter 11. We'll begin reading in verse 1. If I didn't make that clear earlier, I apologize. I usually try to do that, and I may have forgotten. Chapter 11, verse 1, Jephthah the Gileadite was a brave warrior. His mother was a prostitute, but Gilead was his father. Gilead's wife also gave him sons. When this wife's sons grew up, they made Jephthah leave and said to him, "You're not going to inherit any of our father's wealth because you're another woman's son." So Jephthah left his half-brothers and lived in the land of Tob. Lawless men joined with Jephthah, forming a gang, and then they traveled with him. It was sometime after this when the Ammonites began to fight with Israel. When the Ammonites attacked, the leaders of Gilead asked Jephthah to become their leader coming back from the land of Tob. They said, "Come be our commander so that we can fight with these Ammonites." Jephthah said to the leaders of Gilead, "But you hated me. You made me leave my father's house. Why do you come to me now that you're in trouble?" The leaders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "That may be true, but now we pledge to you our loyalty. Come with us and fight the Ammonites, then you will become the leader of all who live in Gilead." Jephthah said to the leaders of Gilead, "All right, if you'll take me back to fight with the Ammonites and the Lord gives the Ammonites to me, I will be your leader." The leaders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "The Lord will judge any grievance you have against us if we do not do as you say." So Jephthah went with the leaders of Gilead. The people made him their leader and commander, and Jephthah repeated the terms of the agreement before the Lord in Mizpah. Now, this text, I'm going to summarize some of the rest of the text as we go because the story plays into this pretty heavily and it's not able to be understood unless we understand a little more about what Jephthah has committed to do here. However, I want to take a look at something that strikes me immediately in this text, and that is this. Look at the damage that is done to a person's life on the basis of racism.
Yeah.
I mean, think about what racism is. Now, you may say, well, these are all Jews. This isn't racism. Yes, it is. You know what racism is? Racism is a negative assessment or an assessment of any kind towards someone on the basis of the lineage of their birth. That's all it is. Now, I want to ask us a question. What human being has anything to say about where they're born, to whom they're born, how they're born? What do we have to say? These are what are known as immutable characteristics. That is, we can do nothing about them. You know, one of the aspects of human nature that I find terrible, I'll just put it that, it's the best word that fits it, it's terrible, is that we feel no compunction at all, especially in children. You see this in children a lot, about pointing out flaws in somebody else's anatomical presentation. Now, stop and think about what that means. Does anybody have any control over what kind of skeleton they get? No. Does anybody have any control over their genetics? No. Does anybody have any control over the way in which their body might develop as time goes on? Maybe some. I mean, if you eat 1,000 donuts a week, you're probably going to be a little chunky. But on the whole, this pointing these things out in other people that are immutable is just so destructive. And yet that's exactly what they've done to Jephthah, for no other reason than he was born to somebody they didn't like. And it points to another feature of the ancient world that I think is just, again, terrible, and that is polygamy. I mean, name one scenario in the Bible. Pick any one. I don't care which one it is. You show me one where the polygamy didn't create all kinds of problems. I don't care whether they were followers of God or not. Show me one, and we'll talk about it. There isn't one. The reason I can say that with confidence is I know there isn't one where those things didn't become problems. So he's rejected through no fault of his own. He didn't ask to be born. He didn't ask to have the prostitute as his mother. He didn't ask for his mother to come together with his father. And so he's damaged in this way to the point that he becomes a rebel. Moves off someplace, acquires a gang. Doesn't really say exactly what they did. I'm going to guess by the text it wasn't good stuff. They weren't coming and helping elderly people with their chores. They were doing other things that required a gang kind of mentality, living as an outlaw in the land of Tob. And so the Jews approach him because he has a reputation as being a good warrior, because they're in trouble. And what are they doing? They are offering Jephthah a cure for that which they inflicted upon him. In this, you just start to think about how this all functions together, and it starts to almost become humorous in a way. It's like me walking up to somebody with a ruler and just beating them across the face until their face is purple, and then handing them, say, let's go out for ice cream. Let me give you some ice cream. I mean, I'm going to try to help with what I've done to the person. That's exactly what they're doing with Jephthah. They've cast him out. How many years has he been an outcast? We don't know. And in that, now they're going to bring him back and say, you know, we'll treat you like you really matter now because we need you for something. Yeah. Now, Jephthah's a Jew. It's clear to me because he cites all kinds of Jewish history in his exchange with the Ammonite king. He recites the fact that they tried, this goes on in the text as you read forward, they tried to pass through the Ammonite land, and they were rejected by the Ammonite king. Jephthah says, look, 300 years ago this happened, and we've been here now for 300 years, so he knows the history, which actually isn't quite the case, but that's all right. 300 was close. He reminds the king of all this, the king of the Ammonites, in a letter that he sends to the king of the Ammonites. Who are the Ammonites? That's a big question, right? Well, in this era of history, most people are named for their fatherly lineage. Jephthah is a Gileadite because he's the son of Gilead. That's all. Okay, the Ammonites are the sons of and daughters of Ammon. What is Ammon? Ammon is the firstborn of an incestuous relationship between Lot and his youngest daughter. Do you know what the word Ammon means in Hebrew? Inbred. Now, stop and think for a second. If that was the title of your ethnicity, your ethnic title is inbred. I mean, how would you feel? What kind of people would grow up in a setting where their very title is that of inbred. Jephthah knows something about them. He knows about the history to the point that he says, look, if you keep reading, you'll see this. He says, look, why don't you guys just settle down and be happy with the land that your God Chemosh has given you? And we'll be happy with the land that our God Yahweh has given us. Why can't we just do that? In other words, can we just all get along? Well, this agreement that he has with the Jews, with the Gileadites at this point, comes about in a sense of, it looks to be a sense of mutual trust. They both have a need that each can satisfy. And the Gileadites are willing to exchange dignity for Jephthah in order that he solve their problem with the Ammonites. Well, how could Jephthah trust the elders of Gilead at this point? Well, he's going to trust them the same way they trust him. Not what we would refer to as trust. They need Jephthah because of his skills as a warrior. I would say Jephthah probably would enjoy being recognized as a dignified member of Gilead once again and not being an outcast. I think that would feel good to Jephthah. So we have a contract being formed, an enforced trust. It's not a trust that comes from just knowing someone, like I would say know Marshall and trust Marshall, or know Nancy and trust Nancy, or any of you. It's not that at all. No, there's a common goal here. There's a practical reason we need to trust one another. It's just like when we buy a house. I want the house. The house seller wants the money. So we sit down with a third party who gives us all kinds of papers to sign to make sure that everybody's going to obey the rules of the contract. It's not necessarily, we don't just go up to somebody and meet them, ring the doorbell and say, you know, I really like your house and I notice it's for sale. Could we just shake on it? That's not going to happen. I promise I'll pay you the rest of the money. Here's $1,000. Even though the house is $200,000, I'll pay the rest along and along. Will you just take my word for it? No, they're not going to take my word for it. They're going to ask for a contract. So in this case, we've got a situation where the enemy of my enemy, that is the Ammonites, is now my friend. Jephthah is an enemy so far as they are concerned, but now he's the enemy of their enemy. So Jephthah becomes their friend. Not because they like him, not because they respect him, but because the common goal that they have means more to them than the person. I mean, how many times do we have an election where somebody says, ooh, I held my nose and then I voted for so-and-so? Because it's just practical, right? It's not that we think the person to be a person of integrity or a person that deserves the office. We have to hold our nose and pull the lever for that person because there's a common goal we might have that seems more in line with the way we think life ought to go. It becomes practical. This is what I would call conditional promising. Conditional promising. Not promising because we really want to be a person of integrity, but because we have a condition that needs to be met. We need some help somewhere, so we'll make that promise. G.K. Chesterton says this is the best definition of a promise I have ever heard. So I'll share it with you. A vow is an appointment we make with ourselves at a distant time and place. Now think about that for just a minute. It means that I am making a promise today that I know I will fulfill onward. We, in our belief structures, will make promises on the basis of the belief structure we have, whatever that is. Think about a person, some of you in this room know who this is, some of you don't, that's all right. Louise Beverly. Louise Beverly understood exactly what this term that G.K. Chesterton describes as a vow is. Louise Beverly had a pregnancy and Marvin came to be. Marvin had cerebral palsy in a very severe degree. Marvin had to be cared for constantly, and Louise Beverly made a vow, a promise that she was going to keep at a distant time and place, in other words, the rest of her life, that I'm going to care for Marvin no matter what. And she kept that vow. She kept it. I went over there to visit her when Marvin was 64 years old. Louise was 85 years old. Marvin was in the bed. Louise was in a house that had no heat, no air conditioning. The only heat in there was a potbelly stove in the kitchen. We as a church started to have a relationship with her such that we sent a roofer over there to fix her roof because it was leaking so badly. Now, I don't know what that means for some of her other members of her family. I'll let you decide that. But what I do know is this. Louise was keeping her vow. Totally. As a matter of fact, once she got to the place where she could physically no longer do this, they took her and Marvin and put them in the same room in a nursing facility in Homerville where she continued to keep her vow till the point she left this world. That's where she made an appointment with herself on Marvin's behalf and never abandoned that appointment. She sacrificed her life for Marvin. I know other families right now, good friends of mine, who are doing the same thing right now. Every decision they make is on behalf of an appointment they have made with themselves to keep a vow for the rest of their lives relative to someone they care for. Now just think about this for a minute. As we look at Jephthah and this exchange he's having with the Gileadites, what would it mean to you and me if God's promise to us were conditional like this? What would it mean if God's promise to grant salvation on the basis of what Jesus has done would be only partial and the rest of it would be up to you and me? He might look at us and say, you know, I'm going to back out of this contract with you because you're not worthy of it. I think he would say that about every one of us in this room if it were up to us. You see, this is the dividing line in Christianity. This is where people look at what Jesus has done and the covenant that God has made, and they say, oh, that's terrible. That's terrible that somebody would, you want somebody to pay the price for your sin. Well, I don't want to pay it myself. Do you? And the dividing line is so sharp and harsh, based purely on one's stance before God, because if it's based on anything else, it becomes up to you and me to keep it. Think about that for a minute, what that would mean for life. How would we then live if everything we did and said and thought or participated in was based purely on our earning our way into salvation? How would we live that? It boggles the mind to think about it. That's why God's dividing line is razor thin on the basis of what Jesus has done and your stance and mine before that, and that alone. Nothing else matters. Now, I'm not saying go out there and live for the flesh and the devil just because the dividing line has been satisfied, we've become born again. I'm not saying that. No believer would want to. Think about that for a minute. You see, we can't do it. And so anytime we come to something like this, we come to people and we make comparisons because the comparisons always are in our favor. If I come, we talked about it in Sunday school, if I come to the elevator and there's the big guy with the tattoos and the wallet on a chain and the long short pants and he's huge and he's got a long beard and he's got rubber bands in it all the way down and he's wearing some shirt that says something vile, and I'm thinking maybe I'll wait on the next elevator, I'm making a judgment about him saying, I'm better than getting in an elevator with you. Man, that's what happened with Jephthah. He's born to a prostitute, so he's rejected. He didn't ask for that, but he's rejected. Look, we base our assessments on things like birthright, accomplishment, notoriety in the community, reputation, and I'm not saying any of those things are bad. They're good things. If we have a good reputation, if we're born into a good family, if we learn good things, if we're moral, those are all good things. But God's got a different standard. His standard is the human heart's brokenness toward him, and that's it. Have we come to the place where we've bent our knee to him on the basis of what Jesus has done for us? And the only way we stand before him is to say, Jesus died for me, I've believed it. That's all. And what do? We then reach out, and I say this with reverence, but it's the truth. We reach out with grubby little hands, and we take the gift that he offers us through no merit of our own. We're back to Oswald Chambers. Belief in salvation is the abandonment of all merit, any claim to merit. That's why it's hard to believe. I mean, think about it from you and my perspective this morning. Do we like to think of ourselves as coming to God with dirty hands and taking the gift from him just because he wants to offer it? Doesn't feel good, does it? It's like, man, let me get dressed. Let me get on some better clothes before I show up to take the gift, you know? Let me comb my hair. Let me brush my teeth, get my breath a little better. Let me make myself presentable before I come before you. And God says, I don't care about any of that. You've got to decide what you're going to do with Jesus, and that's the only thing that's going to matter when you stand before me. I love what Philip Yancey says. Did you know Philip Yancey, the author, Billy Graham said, I would rather read Philip Yancey about God than anybody else on earth. That's a pretty good recommendation. Philip Yancey in the book, The Jesus I Never Knew, a book I would recommend to anybody. He says this, that dark Golgothan Friday can only be called Good Friday because of what happened on Easter Sunday, a day which gives us a tantalizing clue to the riddle of the entire universe. Easter opened a crack in the universe winding down toward entropy and decay, which the whole universe is winding down, right? Sealing the promise that someday God will enlarge the miracle of Easter to cosmic scale. We live in Saturday waiting. I love that. I mean, think about it. Just look at Jesus. Take any of his parables. Take the parable of the guy, the tax collector. Comes into the synagogue. Pharisees look over there, they see him, they say, I thank God, Lord, that I'm not a woman. This used to be a rabbinic prayer. I thank God that I'm not a woman, a slave, or a Gentile. And I thank God I'm not like that tax collector. And the tax collector comes in and beats his chest and says, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And Jesus says, which one of these you think went home justified? Yeah. I mean, this idea of deserving something or being exalted in any way is the source of so much mischief in human existence. And it's where our belief structures come down to either ill or good. If I think I deserve something, think now for a second of this statement. If I think I deserve something myself, then I am allowing myself the justification to compare myself with somebody else. The only thing that gives us the ability to live in peace is that God will keep his promises. That's the only thing. It's not me, because I'm not. I'm going to break them all the time. The only thing that gives me peace is that God won't. He won't break his promises. There are two tensions for us. And I say this just as something to think about as we go forward in the day or the week, or maybe the next 5 minutes after all this is forgotten. I don't know how that's going to work for you, but if we don't find church or the gathering relevant to our lives, why might that be? Maybe it's just because everything in the gathering is so bad it's not helping anything. That's possible, I suppose. But maybe it's because we're not living our lives as sacrifices in the small areas. The small areas, you know, those are the ones that really matter. Anybody can be a hero, right? Right, think about it. Think about the guy at the 14th Street Bridge in Washington, D.C., helping other people to the rope ladder that the helicopter let down in the freezing water until he finally succumbed to the cold and drowned himself. He was a hero, no question about it. But you know, that is a lot simpler a moment than it is to get up every day and consider being a follower of Jesus in all the little decisions that we're making all throughout the day. Very much easier. Not to diminish what he did, but just to say, that's not where we're living. Are you planning on being in freezing water today and helping people to a rope ladder? I don't think so. And secondly, if we don't find our lives conform to that which we see the Bible giving us to be, why is that? That's the other reason we don't find it relevant. Why is that? It's because we still deem other things more important than the integrity that we have before the Lord. Belief in salvation is the abandonment of any claim to merit. Oh man. There's a better way though. And if we choose to hold on to merit, misery is going to be the outcome. It always is. But there's a better way. There's a better way. And that's just to surrender. Just to surrender to Him. And trust that all the merit is on His side, not mine. And then to ask Him. Ask Him. It's a good thing. Let's not be against Him. Let's ask Him for help to be more for Him. Jesus said, those who aren't for me or against me. Well, okay. In a lot of instances, I'm against Him. I am. But wouldn't it be great to just ask Him for help to be more for Him? There's no loss in that. I don't know where everybody is today, but if I've said anything about which you've got a question, you want to pray with me,